Hello everyone, welcome. And today we have Mette Johansson from the Johansson MetaMind Training. She's the founder and director of the organization, and she has a lot of experience in Asia. And she'd like to share with you a little bit more about what it takes to really win in Asia. Welcome, Mette.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thanks for joining us on the show today. Right, and please share a little bit about yourself and what do you do every day? What's
Sure, what I do every day, very different things. I love to have a lot of variety in my life, and I've definitely achieved that. I run a training consultancy, MetaMind Training, and we focus on the people side of leadership skills. We very often end up doing things such as communication skills, how do you manage across different cultures. Of course, change mindset is a very big part of it. In general, how do you develop leaders? I love the topic of authentic leadership. That is one of the things I speak about as a keynote speaker. And because I'm a professional speaker, I've also launched a non-profit initiative, which is 100% volunteer-based, to bring more women to speaking stages around the world. We are doing this on top of our full-time jobs and running businesses. In fact, when I say we, it's because there's 40 volunteers just in Singapore working on this initiative.
40?
40
Wow.
volunteers, yeah.
Okay.
It's a huge machinery already. It's a large organization to run. And we've recently expanded to the US. So another few volunteers have just come on board in the US to spread our messages and get diversity on stages in the US. Meaning that with the EU launch last year, we are now the leading directory of women speakers in the world.
Wow, that's very good to hear, and we need more women on stage as
Absolutely.
we need more women in our shows.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And how did you end up in Asia, and what's your story?
My story, my international story. How did I end up in Asia? Now, when I was not even 3 years old, my parents moved from Denmark, where I'm born, to the Netherlands, where I lived for 10 years during my childhood. And from a Singapore perspective, of course, Denmark or the Netherlands doesn't make much of a difference. But I can tell you, when that was in 1970, that is a long time ago, there was a big difference between the capital of Denmark, Copenhagen, and then moving to the Netherlands in a smaller town. And I was, of course, thrown into the local environment. I didn't understand the language. I just started acquiring the language myself, Danish language. And yeah, I lived there for 10 years, went to local schools, and living in different countries, I grew up with it. So when I finished high school, I wanted to continue my travels. I wanted to work abroad, study abroad, and I've done that ever since. I've only lived in Denmark for 10 years and the Netherlands for 10 years. And this month is actually very special because I also lived in Singapore for 10 years. So
Wow,
it's 3 countries, 10 years right now, 11 countries in total.
You've lived in 11 countries.
Yes.
Which Asian countries have you lived in?
I lived in Japan, I lived in China, People's Republic of China, and also Taiwan, and now Singapore for 10 years. Wow. So those are my Asian countries. And what brought me to Singapore, I was, because I grew up with different languages and I traveled in Europe after I finished high school. I studied in different countries in Europe. At some point of time, I thought I want a challenge in languages. So I looked for a language that was completely different. And at this point of time, that was in the 80s, China was opening up. So I thought, well, let's study Chinese, because there's surely need for some people who speak Chinese whenever China is opening up.
So do you speak Mandarin still?
I like to say spoke, like in the past tense. So don't test me on it right now, please. That's right. Yeah, so that brought me out to Asia, having studied Mandarin. I studied out in Asia. I worked in Shanghai, and later work took me to Japan and Singapore, back to Japan and back to Singapore again.
So I would
it's a bit
say
to and
that
fro.
you'll be one of the pioneers who actually set up and live and work in Asia.
Oh, I can tell you that
things have changed.
It felt like being a pioneer when I wasn't working in Shanghai. I arrived in Shanghai in 1996, and at that point of time, I believe there were like 2 bars in Shanghai that foreigners would go to. There would be the Hard Rock Cafe and then Maloney's or something like that. And it was so difficult to meet people. In the office, there were only a few foreigners, and one that I did get along with, she was always on a business trip, she wasn't there. The other one, I didn't really get along with her, so there was no social life with foreigners at the office.
Okay.
And because I had studied Mandarin, I was working in Shanghai. Everybody at that point of time spoke Shanghai dialect.
Oh, yes.
So I didn't build up a social network at work either.
It's like the Chinese version of Pidgin English.
It was definitely very different, and I didn't understand a word of what was being said at the office. So it was a tough time, you know. Socially, there was nowhere really to go to socialize. At work, I couldn't really socialize.
So if you had to really share with us maybe one of the biggest challenges getting in Asia and growing in Asia and, you know, developing leadership in Asia, what would that be?
My biggest challenge was working in Shanghai, where I was in an environment where people were not so far in their economic development. In 1996, when I worked there, Shanghai was not so developed. Of course, today when you go to Shanghai, it's completely different. I can tell you, it was very rudimentary, my life in Shanghai in 1996. So what are the biggest challenges? Now, this was my personal challenge. What are challenges in general? I would say that the human mind is focused on sameness. We are biased against differences. And if you take 2 very, very different cultures and put them together, there are lots of challenges in working together, simply because our first reaction is, people are different, they're not like me, and they're maybe not rational, they're maybe even stupid. You know, there's all kinds of thoughts that come up in our minds when we deal with people from different countries. So today I work in, I do training also in cultural intelligence and managing across borders. The place where you have to start is to accept that we're different, and actually not just accept it, but also have a curiosity for other cultures. Have this people curiosity of, hey, that's interesting, you're doing things differently, so what is that? So start with a curiosity and an appreciation of different cultures.
And in your training, is there any success story that you like to share? You know, has it created a lot of impact?
I would say every single training creates positive impact, especially because I follow the pattern of appreciating different cultures and creating awareness that there are different cultures and that we are not owners of rational thinking in one culture. Rational thinking, how we define what's rational and what's not, depends on our background. It depends on our cultural upbringing. And then, of course, you need to have a good knowledge about how do different cultures act, behave, think, feel, what are their underlying beliefs. And finally, you need to have an adaptability in terms of adapting to other countries, cultures, and finding strategies to deal with the differences.
Sounds very exciting. Okay, we're talking to marketers and business owners, and I think we're joined by people all around the world. Is there one thing that you would recommend to be able to win in Asia, to be able to succeed and to do well?
It sounds very ridiculous when I say this. It works though. It's turn on your people interest switch. It's simply about turning something in your mindset of saying, I am going to find out what's interesting about this person. When you go into a situation, into a conversation with that attitude of, I want to find that 1 or 2 things that's really fascinating about this person, go into a conversation like that and you will have a completely different outcome. You will see that people are interesting, that people are fascinating. So that's, if there's one thing, it's about turning on your people curiosity button in your head. It sounds strange, and I share it every single time I work with people. And first also, they have funny faces. In the end, they get it. that is what's fundamentally important to work across borders.
To be an explorer and
Exactly.
adventurer,
Exactly.
to really open up.
Exactly, and have that appreciation that we're different, and find it exciting that, hey, that's so fascinating that you see it from this point of view when I see it from this point of view.
Wow, that's wonderful. Okay, everybody, Mette has shared with us how her life has changed by coming to Asia, living in Asia, working in Asia, and developing her business and a family here in Asia as well. And for yourself, if you want to take up the challenge, listen to what she says, turn on your people interest skills, right? To be really adventurous, go and find what's interesting about the people you're going to meet all over Asia. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of stories that you can tell as well. So until we get to the Asia Marketing Summit here, we're signing off here. Thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you.